Welcome to the Nurtured Nerds Epic Podcast.
Come join us and get cuddly, get gaming, and get nerdy.
And get nurtured. That's right. Thanks, Jasmine.
Almost.
Almost. I love doing these on Zoom. You're never synced anyway. So, yeah, we have fun. What are we going to be talking about today, Jasmine?
Welcome, everyone. This is the podcast where nerdiness meets wellness. I love that. To level up real life adventures and connection. On this episode, number 32, we will be exploring the deepest depths of the universe and nerding out on all things space exploration with our incredible guest, Andy Calloway, who works with NASA and robotics solar system exploration. We will also talk about what's going on with the community of nerds, cuddlers, and gamers, which is free to join. So please reach out to us with a comment or an email and let us know what you are nerding out about.
Nice. Let's do some introductions because we've got some folks here to talk with us today that are pretty interesting people. I'm Mary Sorensen. I'm actually in Panama right now where I live now. I'm retired, which is really great. It's nice and warm here today. I am a cuddler and a cuddle party facilitator, and I'm also the president of the board of Cuddle Party Inc. now. So my sweet spot is working with group cuddle events and education. And I've been doing that for about 10 years now. I love doing connection work, just building community and helping people connect in really good ways. Yeah, so that's me, and I'm with Nurtured Nerds because it was a great project, and we've been able to connect in different ways through the nerds. And today I am drinking water, my favorite beverage ever in the world. Highly recommend it.
Just plain water, no additives, no fruits or
plain old plain
stuff in it.
Plain old plain water.
That's our lifeline for the astronauts when they start exploring space.
That's right. Yeah, Andy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself now that we've heard from you? That would be great.
Sure. My name's Andy Calloway. I'm based out of College Park, Maryland, not far from the University of Maryland. And I work at the Applied Physics Laboratory, which is part of Johns Hopkins University. And I've been working on NASA missions for over 22 years now, and happy to share all my experiences over the years and some of the exploration that we've done. It's pretty fun stuff.
That's excellent, Andy. Thanks for joining us today. I've always been a space and science kind of geek. I actually thought I'd be an astronomer when I was a kid. That was my dream. Yeah.
When I was we need more dark skies. There's too much light pollution. Hopefully in Panama you have some good dark skies.
Yeah, there are places where you can really see the stars here. Definitely. Yeah. Cool. What are you drinking today, Andy? Anything fun?
Just Dunkin' Donuts, and actually it is water also.
Water. Stuff of life. Stuff of life. How about you, Jasmine? Jasmine, my co-host today. What are you doing today?
My name is Jasmine Simon, and I'm in Maryland. I'm also a platonic touch practitioner, although lately I've been playing around with different words, moving more towards bidirectional platonic therapeutic touch. Always trying to find that good title, that good label that resonates with me. But I work mainly with people one-on-one, providing touch, human connection, creating the compassionate, safe, non-judgmental space. And I have two locations, one in Williamsburg, Virginia, which I'm there only once a month for a couple of days, and then one in downtown Bethesda, Maryland, which is my main hub. And I want to share my special drink with all of you. I went to the store and I got some Screwball. Have you guys ever had Screwball?
I can only think of the cocktail.
We need more information.
Cocktail. Yeah, it's peanut butter whiskey. It is delicious. It tastes like syrup. It's more syrup than whiskey, I think.
Cool. Okay, did you say peanut butter whiskey?
I did, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look into that.
It's very, very sweet. When you think whiskey, you think burn my throat, but this isn't that. It's almost like a liqueur. It's delicious.
Mm.
It sounds wonderful. I do like the
How
burn
fun.
your throat whiskey, but I'll have to try the peanut butter.
More fun in wintertime, though. It's like spring outside.
Yeah.
It's still a little chilly, maybe because you're further south than me. You got 30 more minutes south than I am, so.
Mhm. And we've just heard from Bethany, who is on our panel today, just to help us have a good rounded conversation. Bethany, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Bethany. I'm here in Pittsburgh, and I am drinking ginger tea.
Mm.
So
Good stuff.
that's yummy for
Nice and
me.
healthy.
Yum. Yes.
And I'm retired, so I do a lot of reading science fiction and gardening and
Mhm.
fun things like that. And more end users on the therapy department rather than practitioners of anything.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for introducing yourselves. Let's see, Jasmine, do you want to start with a question that you're burning to ask? Our first question.
Sure. I'm a little confused. Give me just a moment.
I think I'd like to start with, maybe, since if you're not ready, just a second. I'd like to ask Andy, like, do you identify with the term nerd, or do you like geek, or is that like not a thing we should call real
All of the above is
scientists?
perfectly fine. Just like a lot of people in my industry, you know, I grew up, you know, reading science fiction, a lot of the classics, you know, like Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. I grew up in South Florida and went to grad school in Melbourne, Florida, right near Kennedy Space Center. So I had the privilege of seeing, you know, a lot of rocket launches and stuff in my youth. So those are all pretty heavy influences and certainly puts me in that category.
Yeah.
And a lot of my
Nice.
friends are too, you know, we're definitely like Big Bang Theory in real life, some of us for sure.
I just watched every episode of Big Bang Theory. I loved it.
Andy, which character do you identify more with?
Probably Leonard. He seems to be the more balanced of all of them, I think.
Kind of even keeled.
Yeah. He can adapt to all
That's
the different
right.
worlds better than everybody else, kind of, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
I guess I didn't really give a huge introduction. If it helps any with the questions, I can just mention when I first started planetary space, I worked on the Messenger mission, which was a NASA project that went to the planet Mercury. And then in parallel with that, for the last few years of that project, I worked on New Horizons, which went to Pluto, which is no longer a planet and is a bit controversial. Some people want it to still be a planet. And then most recently, as far as a flight project, I was the ops manager for OSIRIS-REx, which went to an asteroid called Bennu and collected a sample back in 2020. And then actually just last September, you might have seen it in the news, we brought the sample back to Earth and it parachuted down in the Utah desert. And so now they're studying it in laboratories all around the world. So that's my most recent flight projects. And then I have two upcoming ones that haven't launched yet. One going to Jupiter's icy moon Europa, and then the other one will be a quadcopter about the size of a Mini Cooper, which will be flying all around Saturn's giant moon Titan. So bouncing all around the solar system.
Fantastic.
So maybe that'll help with context.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Cool. I don't know. I'm just kind of overwhelmed. I'm like, oh my gosh, so many questions. Wait, but I can't think of any right now.
One thing that comes to mind just real quick, Bethany was talking about gardening, and I don't know if anybody's ever been to Epcot Center in Orlando, but they have a pavilion called The Land, and part of that you can see the kind of advanced hydroponics, where they grow a lot of the plants in like a vertical way instead of horizontal, and they have the water that like drips down. And I can definitely envision in the future, you know, when we have, you know, space bases like on the moon and Mars and, orbital platforms, I could see us gardening in that way. So, so I don't know, Bethany, if you're familiar with that, but that's kind of an interesting topic.
Yeah, I've done hydroponics and yeah, it is a fascinating thing. I can see it on the moon or in space.
Yeah, and if you ever saw the movie The Martian with Matt Damon, he was a botanist, and that's what kept him alive when he was stranded alone on Mars.
I enjoyed that movie.
All right, who's up next?
Jasmine?
Me.
Yeah.
So working on projects for NASA, do you find yourself making new connections with people you meet across the country or world?
Oh, definitely. It's an expression you hear all the time where the circles all run together and overlap. Sometimes you may not hear from a person for a few years because your paths diverge and you end up working in different places. But then inevitably, we always seem to come back together and overlap on a new project, which is kind of fun. You're like, hey, how have you been these last few years? And we also have conferences and things like that we go to when we write papers. And that's an opportunity, to kind of keep up with people. For one of my upcoming projects, it's called Europa Clipper. We have partners at the Jet Propulsion Lab out in California. So we work with them a lot. You have to deal with the time zone differences, which is a bit of a pain, but so we have colleagues across the country. When I worked on OSIRIS-REx, I actually had to travel to Denver, I'd say about every 2 months for about 4 years because the flight ops team was Lockheed Martin out in Littleton, Colorado. So I have friends there still to this day, as well as, locally. We have facilities here in Greenbelt, which is where NASA Goddard Space Center is. And of course, colleagues down in Florida. So yeah, pretty much all around the world. For sure.
Do you think this search for knowledge that really is the point of space exploration, right? Is just seeking knowledge, right?
Yeah, I kind of think of it as two sides of the coin. One is, knowledge, just pure exploration and just the way that can lead to different unknowns that might, help us. The other side is what we call spin-offs. So a lot of the technology we kind of take for granted today, like MRIs and different kinds of materials, even different kinds of like materials you would see in your shoes. Just all kinds of things we take for granted actually all are derived from space technology advancements.
Okay.
We even drink Tang to this day, at least some people do. So
I remember Tang. That was going to be, yeah, that was kind of what I was leading to. Like, what else are we getting out of it? I mean, we have connections with people all over the country and all over the world through exploration and this search of knowledge and finding new things that can help us, like Tang or freeze-dried ice cream, I guess.
The other aspect that I like to think about is the whole don't put all your eggs in one basket mentality. So we've all heard the stories about, the asteroid that contributed to the demise of the dinosaurs like 65 million years ago, combined with these large volcanic eruptions that happened. And there's also things like giant solar flares that we've had some near misses that could, wipe out all our satellites and basically knock us back to like, medieval days and, all kinds of things like that could happen. And so the more we diversify and eventually get out into space, the more we can avoid, going back a few hundred years.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like your specialty is more in the unmanned missions, but do you think that manned missions to other bodies in space is really feasible in our lifetime or after?
Yeah, there's a lot to overcome. There's no doubt about that. I know one of the main things that's been going on the last 20 years on the space station is, human studies. We have a lot of doctors that participate in that, and they're always coming up with new machines like special treadmills for like zero gravity environments. Different ways to keep your bones healthy when you're in microgravity, and they're finding all kinds of problems with like your eyes. One interesting study is there's a couple of astronauts that are actually twins, and one of them stayed home on Earth while the other went up to space for long duration. And then when he came back home, he's actually a senator out in Arizona. But when he came back home, they did a lot of kind of comparison studies, and things like his height changed and and the blood work was different. So we need to learn a lot about that for going out into space. We were
Right.
all showing water earlier, finding ways, what we call in situ, where we can derive things from the environment instead of having to carry it with us from Earth, is particularly important. Being able to like mine water ice from the moon, for example, to sustain colonies. Yeah, all of that's important, but we're not quite there yet. It's kind of frustrating, right? Because we're right on the cusp. You can kind of sense we're getting close, but we're just not there yet.
When
So,
you're talking about the biology of humans and tracking it to see what it can and can't do, and the difference from being in space and then coming back here to land, my son and I were wondering, I think this was like a month or so ago, we were trying to figure out, can women be pregnant? Can a fetus sustain in space? And so of course we Googled it, because where are we without Google? And Dr. Google said that, that we're still unsure if the fetus could take the radiation that so many
Yeah.
that astronauts or humans are exposed to.
yeah, that was going to be my point. I think biologically it's not a problem, but you need to keep the baby safe, and finding out new and kind of advanced ways to have radiation shielding is super important. Water is a great one, if you can have like a moon base where you're partially covered, by the dirt, what we call regolith, and having like layers of water in the walls, is one way. And of course, going underground, we're starting to find all kinds of lunar pits on the moon from the LRO spacecraft, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. And some of these pits and caverns are big enough to hold an entire town. I mean, they're huge. It's not like just this tiny tunnel. And we suspect on Mars, there's a lot of probably underground areas as well as the moons of Mars, like Phobos. So, being able to just go underground and have cities, is probably the way to start out to keep everyone healthy, I would think.
Interesting. Okay. So when you're talking about a barrier, water barrier, you're not talking about something that would be circulating, say, a craft. You're referring to more something that would be on land.
No, it could be literally a couple of inches of water inside the walls, potentially, who knows?
Interesting. I had no
There's a
idea
lot
that
of
maybe,
ideas.
I mean,
Yeah.
it makes sense, given our atmosphere, but okay, I just never thought about that. It's
The
fascinating.
key is to deflect some of these cosmic particles, right? So they don't make it all the way through and go through the human body, right? So you have to not just block, but deflect, so it kind of bounces away.
So the water is an actual barrier
Mhm.
to
Yeah, that's just one idea
yeah.
of many. Yeah, for sure. Of course, what we call artificial gravity is probably pretty important for anything long term. You've seen the famous pictures of these space hotels that are like donut shaped, and they basically rotate. And so you could simulate different levels of gravity depending on how fast you rotate. If you want to simulate Mars gravity, if you want to simulate Earth gravity, so that you don't have to go through these huge adjustments when you go back and forth. So that's also helpful for the human body, and keeping our muscles from atrophying and our bones from getting too brittle, all that good stuff.
So have they found water on any other, I mean, you said you're going to Europa, and where are you going next?
Yeah, a couple fun factoids, if you will. My first planetary space mission was called Messenger, and it went to planet Mercury, which is the closest planet to the sun. If you think of the Earth distance to the sun, that's what we call 1 astronomical unit, 1 AU. And Mercury is a lot closer, so it's 0.3 to 0.47 or so AU from the sun, so it's that much closer. And the sun would actually be about 11 times the intensity if you were to stand on Mercury's surface compared to the Earth. And that huge heat environment, there was a huge surprise. Well, first of all, Mercury spins on its axis with very little tilt. It's almost straight up and down compared to the Earth, which, as you know, is 23.5. And so, in the distant past, eons ago, all these comets and asteroids that smashed into it that have water and water ice, basically created these, craters. And because it has no tilt, some of these huge craters at the North and South Pole are permanently shadowed. There's no way for the sunlight to get in there, right? Because it's straight up and down. So because of that, when we've orbited Mercury, we were able to devise some clever ways to kind of image inside at least part of those craters. And we were able to confirm that even though Mercury is the closest planet to the sun, it has water ice at its poles in permanently shadowed craters. So that was one huge discovery that, is really kind of fascinating to think about. You mentioned Europa, the moon of Jupiter. It turns out there's a lot of these moons in the outer solar system that are icy, that have subterranean oceans, if you will. At least we infer that from the data, and more advanced missions will confirm it. So the Europa Clipper mission, which is launching in October, will try to confirm that through different techniques, like radio science, where it can assess the gravity and kind of how it like sloshes, if you will, as it rotates. And so there's a suspicion that Europa has more ocean water under its icy crust than all of Earth's oceans combined. And what's even more fascinating is it's subject to what we call tidal heating, where the huge gravity of Jupiter is constantly pushing and pulling on it. Kind of like when you take a paper clip and you keep bending it back and forth, it feels hot until it breaks. So we think that just like in the Earth's deep oceans, there might be what we call hydrothermal vents, where all this kind of hot water and chemical ingredients might be spewing out. And so that's the ingredients of life, basically, right? You need water, you need some kind of energy source, you need some kind of chemical. It's not photosynthesis like on the Earth's surface, but we've seen weird creatures at our ocean depths, weird like crabs and shrimp that are like, basically blind, but they thrive down there by these vents. So who knows what could be living down there at the bottom of Europa's ocean. So a lot of cool things to think about. And even some moons that we didn't suspect had any kind of potential ocean, they're starting to think when they go back and look at the data that there might be. You might have heard of the Death Star moon. It looks like the Death Star from Star Wars. It's called Mimas. It has this huge crater. And even that moon, which we had no clue might have an ocean, they think might actually have an ocean. So, there could be all kinds of potential sources out there. So it's a fascinating time to start thinking about what we call astrobiology, life outside of Earth.
Cool.
I don't know. What do you guys think? Could there be giant jellyfish floating around out there or something?
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Bethany. You're good.
I was just wondering, are they thinking about maybe being able to reach out to Europa and work with it more? I mean, I know I've read about trying to put bases on the moon and Mars, but something further out like Jupiter, would that be a possibility? Or not Jupiter, Europa?
Yeah, absolutely. The way NASA likes to explore is they kind of do it incrementally. So usually they start out with some kind of flyby mission, kind of like the old Voyager spacecraft, if you remember them. And then, you eventually have a more mature mission with different instruments that are tailored for that environment specifically. And then they do some kind of orbiting mission like we did with Messenger at Mercury. And then eventually the next step is, some kind of rovers or some kind of in situ vehicle, and then maybe even a sample return like we did with OSIRIS-REx at the asteroid. And for Europa in particular, the ice shell could be really thick, like 4 or 5 kilometers. They don't know for sure, but you can imagine they'd have to come up with some kind of vehicle that would land that would have some kind of heat source where it could like basically tilt over and start melting through the ice, right? And then go all the way down into the ocean and kind of swim around, like one of our submersible, remote vehicles, RVs, taking all kinds of samples and pictures and stuff.
That sounds really great.
I could definitely see that being one of the next steps eventually. I should mention that there's Hubble Space Telescope and the new one, James Webb, you know, they look at these things more and more these days, and they're starting to see things like potential plumes. When they look at the limb of the object, kind of like my background picture, the limb, sometimes if they catch the lighting just right, you can see like plumes coming out where there might be like a crack in the ice and it kind of spews out like a geyser. I know there's a moon called Enceladus, which the Cassini mission at Saturn confirmed has these plumes. And so some of the new missions that people are, you know, designing, even though they may not land, they are being designed to fly through maybe these plumes and somehow understand from the samples what could be underneath. So that's kind of cool.
That is very cool, gathering that information. I have a question. So what are your thoughts about SpaceX and other third-party involvement in space exploration compared to the government-controlled initiatives like Apollo missions?
Well, you can definitely see NASA's moving in that direction. They're relying on SpaceX for transport to the space station for supplies and to get humans back and forth now. And, you know, they just did their third test, I think, of their Starlink. I mean, their Starship. And even though they've been, you know, some of them explode, but, you know, they use that as a lesson. And then each one, you know, they correct those mistakes and it's incrementally advancing. And NASA doesn't want to be in that game, right? They want to do all the long-term, you know, thought exercises and the mission designs that will then be followed by these entrepreneurial missions. We just had several that have gone to the moon, including one that landed. Even though it tipped over, it landed and it actually was able to broadcast for a while. So it's the wave of the future. It's just like, you know, anywhere else on Earth, you know, you kind of have the, you know, exploration like Lewis and Clark, and then eventually the technology follows. So I don't think NASA could do it without it at this point. You know, they need those partnerships now.
And is that because financial burdens?
The budgets are a big part of it. Yeah. There's several NASA missions that were recently canceled, and you know, there's a lot of uncertainty these days, so they need to really put their money where it's most beneficial to advance the ball forward, and then let the other companies, you know, take care of. And you know, we use a lot of contractors. You know, NASA has contractors for years at their space centers that do all the day-to-day work, you know, in conjunction with the civil servants. That paradigm's been there for a long time. It's just now with the exploration side, it's really kind of flipping the other way. And I'm in favor of it.
Take a larger role.
I think that's the best way. And that's where you get more innovation, right? Because these companies are all competing with each other, and that forces them to, you know, really, you know, attract the best engineers out of schools and really think outside the box and really come up with their most, you know, ingenious ways of doing these things. So it's exciting time.
Yeah. I kind of see those issues hooking back into our connection picture of where, you know, government was created because a bunch of people got together and said we all want to do something together, and you know, if we come together we can make roads, we can build libraries, we can do schools, we can go to space, you know. But then we're like, wait a minute, if we're all going to put our resources in a big pot, shouldn't we feed people? Shouldn't we make sure people have education? You know, before we're going to space, you know?
That goes to my last point, and that's a perfect example where, for example, space technology has resulted in a lot of huge improvements in desalinization, ways to extract the salt and get drinkable water. And because of that, people all around the world in some of these like desert countries and in places where they have to walk for miles in the desert, you know, to some well or oasis, now they can just open up a special suitcase that has solar panels and dip it in the salt water, and within minutes they have drinking water. So those are perfect examples of how, you know, NASA exploration is helping us, you know, here on Earth.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's really good.
Incredible.
Yeah. But I'm glad there are these third-party companies of people who have resources to do this kind of thing that want to do and partner with NASA. So
yeah, and they're willing to take on more risk too, compared to NASA.
Yeah.
Oh, so willing to do things that NASA otherwise wouldn't. Now,
Yeah.
aside from finances or budgets, is that what you're
You
saying?
remember the early days of NASA, the Apollo days, and the Mercury 7 astronauts, a lot of them were, test pilots, for example, either in the military like the Navy or whatever.
Mhm.
And so they knew, of course, NASA astronauts know that, they're taking risks and putting their lives at risk. But a
Mhm.
lot of them are, scientists, for example, and have different expertise for the experimentation, and they're not necessarily like test pilots as a career in and of itself. So you need kind of a balance of both, in my opinion. And there's a really interesting show. I don't know if any of you have Apple TV, but there's a show called For All Mankind where the Russians actually beat America to the moon landing. And because of that, it's an alternate history story.
Mhm.
So because of that, we ended up with a space race that lasted for decades. And so we kept trying to one up each other, to have a moon base, a Mars base, a space hotel. And so that competition is really what drove that advancement much faster than we actually saw in real life. So it's pretty interesting. Cool.
What do you think would happen if we just said no more NASA? I mean, what's the downside? I mean, I'm for the search of knowledge, but what do you
I
think?
don't think it would be a permanent
Yeah.
void unless we like do something
Mhm.
catastrophic to ourselves. But I think, it could have a double-edged sword, if you look back at the expansion of America with the rail barons and so on.
Mhm.
They did amazing things technologically in terms of like having a railroad that crosses the continent, but of course there was a lot of downside with the people that were involved, and the lands that were taken and all of the above. So there's always kind of a dark side to it. But if NASA went away, I could see things happening in space where it's pretty much all commercial. Companies like the old rail barons, some
They'd be taken
conglomerates.
over.
It would be
Yeah.
conglomerates, corporations that team up together, and they would probably accomplish some amazing things, but what would be the cost? I'm not sure.
Mm.
It's pretty
Yeah.
interesting to think about or speculate. You think about the pollution and the global warming and stuff on Earth. What kinds of things would they do if they were in space? Without all of the legal protocols. Would there be pollution all over the moon, for example, after they start mining it? Would they have these huge mines on the moon?
Oh yeah.
Like that movie, Time Machine from, I think it was the early 2000s with Guy something, Pierce maybe. And they started building condos, I think, on the moon.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
so
condos in
they
and of
blasted the
themselves
moon
isn't.
in half. And so pieces of it were coming down on the earth.
Mm.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? I mean, it's like anything, right? There's good and bad, so you just
Mhm.
want the good to outweigh the bad.
And it hasn't that been some of the concern with corporations getting involved in space exploration? Is the concern of their bottom line, the concern of their shareholders, and what that's going to bring to the forefront of the intentions behind, what they're doing. We want to assume, I would guess, that NASA is going to really pump the brakes when necessary. But I mean, what are your thoughts around that, or really anybody's thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's more than just NASA. There's other aspects of the federal government that actually have treaties and things, higher level than NASA, where they have these international treaties for how you would, work and live together on like the moon, for example. And there's even these consortiums that are trying to figure out, should the moon have time zones, for example, and things like that. So they're starting to think about these things. And part of that is sustainability. And I guess one of the upsides of what we're experiencing on Earth these days with sustainability and all the clean energy and so on is that mentality, especially with the younger generation, seems like it's sticking, which is a good thing. And I would like to think that would translate into space exploration, where the kinds of treaties and things we put in place are for more sustainable living and things like that, rather than what you're describing, where the chunks are falling back on Earth. So as with anything, you know, you'll see some of each, right? You'll see some people that are greedy that take advantage, and then you'll see some people that are genuine that are trying to do the right thing. So
Yeah.
Do different countries generally work well together with space exploration, or is it more like with the treaties and trying to make things healthier and better? Do they work well together, or is it more competitive?
I think
I
it's
don't
a
know.
mixed it's a mixed bag, I would describe it. And unfortunately, it tends to follow the kind of geopolitical lines. So for example, we work very closely with European Union, with Japan, with India, for, you know, on the International Space Station, for example. It's called international for a reason. It really does have representatives from all these countries, which is wonderful. And you know, in the original days, you know, of course, Russia was a big part of that, and they contributed, you know, elements to the space station. And of course, when the space shuttle program ended, the Russians were the ones keeping us going there until we had these commercial companies that were finally ready. It's unfortunate we had that void. I forget how long it was, like 11 or 12 years. But we work really well with these kinds of countries where it's cooperation, but unfortunately along geopolitical lines, like, you know, with China, it tends to be more competition rather than cooperation. And so, and that, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, you know, like that For All Mankind show that I mentioned, because we had that space race that lasted for decades. I think it forced everyone to constantly be looking how to improve what you do. As long as you don't have with, you know, a war or battle over the territory.
What? Us get involved in a war or a battle? That's preposterous. What are you talking about?
Preposterous.
Yeah, they even had to invent, in that show, they had to invent special rifles that could shoot in the vacuum of space, basically. There was even a
Is that For All
shootout on
Mankind?
Yeah.
I just wrote it down because when we're done, I'm going to go watch it.
Yeah,
I'm curious.
So from my perspective, just one last comment on that is,
Sure.
you know, I'm really into like STEM and trying to get the next generation to be interested in all of these, you know, degrees when they grow up in science and technology and everything. And, you know, there's a lot of debate whether humans should actually start out on the moon and build bases there versus just kind of skipping that and going straight to Mars. And because theoretically Mars is a little more habitable. I tend to be more on a proponent of the incremental start on the moon kind of thing. And one of the reasons for that is inspiring the next generation, because I just like to think if we had a moon base and we were on the Earth looking up at the moon any random time, especially if you're a kid and you look up and you see the moon and you know there's dozens or hundreds of people working there at that exact moment, you know, I got to believe that would be inspiring to get involved, you know, in whatever, aerospace or astronomy or physics. And then it becomes like a snowball effect where, you know, more and more people get interested in that, and more really smart people get involved in it, and it just accelerates things like a snowball. So anyway, that's part of my rationale why I like the idea of starting out at the moon. But you know, there's pros and cons. Some people make really valid arguments about going to Mars first.
I just think the moon is closer, so you have more chance of help, I guess.
That's what I was thinking. It's like a
Yeah.
midway point, and then they don't have to come into the atmosphere, or you know, what happens if whatever's in orbit goes down?
I mean, whatever
got the moon.
Whatever we send to Mars is pretty much out of reach once it's gone. But the moon is, maybe we could still get there to, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you think about like
needed to.
Antarctica, right? People in Antarctica,
Yeah.
they have like telemedicine, where a doctor in America can remotely operate on someone because you don't have a big time delay, what we call a round trip light time. And so the moon would be like that, right? It's only a couple seconds. So you could, you know, theoretically help someone remotely. So you don't have to be quite as autonomous, but you're exactly right. When you go to Mars, you have to have people that are trained to do all that themselves.
You have to think of everything, which is why I think it would be good to have a dry run on a moon base to think, oh my gosh, we did not think of whatever it is. Because yeah, but it happened on the moon. So now we know.
Cannot make
Especially if,
screwball up here. What the hell?
Yeah.
yeah,
know,
where I work at the Applied Physics Lab, it is kind of a hub right now. There's a lot of consortiums with different universities and different institutions trying to advance how we might live on the moon. And that includes designing machinery on how to get water, right from the regolith itself. How do you go about making pavement, for landing pads, and how do you go about, doing the best electricity generation, and battery storage, all of these things. It's a little different than how you would do it on Earth. So they're really starting to think through that.
wow, yeah, man. Something came up for me when you were talking, and I just started thinking, the effect of science fiction on kids that want to go into, science.
Mhm.
I think has been huge, and I think people know it, but do you see that in your ranks of scientists, of people that are like, I watch Star Trek, so now I want to be in science?
Absolutely, not just on TV. I am actually an aspiring children's book author myself.
Oh, wonderful.
I've got a middle grade novel called Moon Quest. It's kind of like that movie National Treasure, if you ever saw that, where you have to solve clues to get to the next step. And in this case, it's across all the moons of the solar system. And so the way I designed the story is all these clues involve some kind of planetary science. And I'm actually putting a glossary together now where theoretically the kid could go to the glossary and look up the answer before they read ahead to the solution. So that's a perfect example where these are real places, right? If we could go there today, you could go to like a national park on Europa or whatever,
Oh, yeah.
and you would have this huge planet in the sky, it'd be really amazing to be able to see that hanging over you. And so I like to, in my story like that, I like to show the environment of what it would actually be like if you were there, and hopefully that'll inspire kids, to get involved in space science. Another fun one that I'm writing is where Santa Claus has to go to Mars for the very first time, and because we now have kids there, and so he has to figure out how to get himself and the elves and the reindeer there safely, and they have to do astronaut training and all this kind of stuff, so you can learn about the hazards of space.
That is so cute. Kids would absolutely love that. What a great idea.
And I'm also working on a nonfiction book that should hopefully be inspiring. There was a contest in 2013 to name this asteroid where OSIRIS-REx went to, and out of 8,000 people that applied, a third grader, a 9-year-old kid, ended up winning it. And
Awesome.
I actually met him when we had like a convention out there in Houston, and we're partnering on a nonfiction book about his experience of winning that contest. And now he wants to be an astronaut, and he goes around the country giving talks. And I supported that book with, talking all about how OSIRIS-REx collected the sample. And so, yeah, we just finished the manuscript, so we're shopping that around now too. So, I like to think there's a lot of creative ways to get kids interested and have them learn without even realizing they're learning is the goal, right? They don't, if you get them, if they're bored, they won't learn, but if they're excited, then it'll sink in.
I had a question, and my experience with NASA is more Big Bang Theory related. I don't I have a picture of what a truck driver does during a day, but I don't have a picture in my head of what a scientist like you would do in a day.
That's a great question. I love explaining that. First of all, every day is a little bit different, which I really like. It's never boring. And especially when you're preparing a mission to launch, there's like 2 phases to a mission. There's the pre-launch phase where you're preparing it and testing it. And then there's after it launches and you take over control and you're operating it. So there's really like 2 different phases, and they're very different from each other. And so, for example, the missions I'm working on now are in the pre-launch phase, and we have what we call integration and tests. So you're taking all these instruments that might come from institutions around the country or around the world, And the experts are in these clean rooms, putting it all together, you know, literally bolting them to the chassis of the spacecraft body, putting on the solar panels, all this stuff. And it has to be in a clean room environment because you don't want dust particles and things like that. Even like smudges from your oil on your hands could get on the optics of a camera, for example. So they wear these special suits. We jokingly call them bunny suits, and you know, they protect everything, even their hair, right? You don't want any strands of hair. And so you have to integrate all these components and build the spacecraft. And then you have to make sure it'll survive all the rigors of launch. And so my job is to come up with all these tests. You know, we put together all the command sequences. I work in what's called mission operations. So we're kind of the hub of the program. So we work with the ground system where you actually like send the commands, and we have to make sure we can look at the data on the display screens. And so we have to figure out exactly what should go on each display page. And we have a simulator that we put together, and we have to decide what should it mimic more accurately from real flight, and what can we do with an emulation where you're just kind of simulating, you know, some thermal environment or whatever. And so we come up with all the testing that we're going to do. And then over a period of a couple of years, many months and years, we put it through all kinds of tests. There's what we call a thermal vacuum chamber where you can put it inside, close the lid, and you can put it through these cycles. You pump out all the air so it's almost vacuum, and you go through real hot and cold cycles, just like you would experience in space. And you put it on these what we call shake tables, where you simulate the rigors of a rocket launch, make sure all the vibration isn't going to make some wire pull loose or whatever. And so we're monitoring all this, and then we're sending all these command sequences that we build and making sure they work flawlessly, you know, and they're not going to like cause the spacecraft to do something that it can't ever recover from, like reboot itself and never wake up or something bad like that. So we do all this pre-launch testing to make sure we're ready, and so that on the day of launch, when the spacecraft pushes it away and it's floating away, we take over. And then from that point on, you know, we build all the command sequences to tell it what to do. We look at all the data as it comes down, make sure it's healthy. If something goes wrong, we have all our contingency scripts ready to go so we can step in and correct the problem. It might just be switching over to a redundant unit. It could be that you put it in a safe mode where it sits there for a while, just pointing happy at the sun while we figure out what went wrong and figure out what to do next. So that's why I love mission ops. It's in the heart of it all. We work with the subject matter experts, the engineers that actually built and designed these subsystems. It could be guidance and control, propulsion, electrical systems, thermal systems. So we're kind of the jacks of all trade. We're the first line of defense. We're the ones that communicate. We call it the deep space network. There's these antennas all around the world, in Australia, in Spain, in California. And if you think about it, they're almost equally placed around the world. So as the Earth rotates, one of those places will come into view of deep space while the other one sets. And so that we can almost have continuous communication if we need to. So we do all of that. We know all the protocols, how to communicate through that network. So you can imagine, depending on where you're going, like, you know, Jupiter or Mercury, you know, you have to deal with the space environment that you're in. You have to understand that. And so it's challenging, but it's very rewarding. It's like super fun. We're rewriting the textbooks, right? All the things the kids are going to be reading in 5 or 10 years were not in those textbooks, you know, 20 years ago. We do feel a bit like explorers, which is really cool. One last little story is for the Messenger mission, we actually had to fly by Mercury 3 times to basically slow its orbit down until it could finally get into orbit around planet Mercury. And prior to that, only Mariner 10 in the mid-70s had only imaged about 40% of Mercury. So a lot of it was just unknown, you know, terrain, incognito. And so when we did our first flyby, we actually had this mosaic sequence that we built for the camera to basically take, you know, mosaic strips where they kind of each image overlaps a little bit and you stitch it all together. So we did that for the other side of the planet that had never been seen. And so there was like 5 of us sitting in the room at midnight waiting for the data to come down. And we had the projector up on the screen just sitting in our chairs, and all of a sudden the images would start flashing up on the screen. And we
Mhm.
realized, hey, we're the first humans in history to be seeing, this crater or this mountain or this valley or whatever. So
Mhm.
it's pretty fun
Pretty
stuff.
exciting.
Inspiring.
Yeah,
Mhm.
pretty exciting. I
Fantastic.
can
Yep.
see how you would want to inspire kids with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, because I see these pictures, when they come down, I think of these as real places, and not just science fiction. So
That's
yeah,
cool.
fun stuff.
Yeah.
Shifting gears a bit, I'm curious about AI and the role it plays in space exploration, how you're using it regularly, and if it's going to help grow what we're doing currently.
Yeah, I personally have not had to interact with it much yet, but I'm looking ahead at some of the technologies. I don't know if you've ever heard of graphene. It's like this material that could actually be used for all kinds of ways, including making what we call space elevators, where you could have this thin strand going from the Earth all the way up to geostationary orbit. And then you could have literally an elevator taking payloads up and down instead of having to launch them. And you can imagine that would be a huge advancement in being able to build stuff out in space, without having to spend the energy and the risk, of course, of launching it from the ground. So AI is helping to find ways to make some of these materials, to advance the way that they can be manufactured, for example, in a more realistic way, in factories. So you could do it in a grand scale, not just, a small sample in a laboratory. So that's where AI is really helping, is just advancing how we're going to make these advanced materials, and maybe even figuring out clever ways to have our what we call trajectories, like how do you get from point A to point B in space. Well, we have software and experts that design, our mission trajectories. But sometimes you can be pretty clever doing, kind of these planetary flybys to get to your destination and not have to spend as much fuel. So AI can help in all these areas where, what takes a human weeks or months, they could probably do it in minutes. So I'm looking forward to it, as long as we don't cross the threshold, right, where we go the other direction like Terminator.
Always the thing, right? That every sci-fi comes around to when you're talking about AI.
Yeah, but I'm seeing all kinds of cool stories, especially like in medicine, where it's putting together different combinations of things for medicines that we never would have thought of. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it really is.
Mhm. Yeah, I kind of want to come back around to our connection theme, because that's kind of what we do here. And think back to and get your opinion on Voyager, the Voyager 1 and 2, with the golden record, that we sent out with our message to space. And do you guys still do that? I mean, is that included
Yep.
on the missions we sent? Really?
Yeah, every
The same
mission is
one?
doing that. In fact, Europa Clipper had
Yeah.
a campaign they called Message in a Bottle, because
Ah,
it's an ocean world. And so
okay.
anyone, and I think it's too late now, unfortunately, but anyone in the public could have sent in their name through the website. And they're doing like these micro engravings essentially. So everybody's name is going out into space, out to Jupiter.
Oh
I
my
think they
gosh.
had, I don't know, like
Wow.
10,000 people or something applied. I can't remember how many. So yeah, we do that all the time. It's just a fun way to do public engagement and get people interested. It's not so much to tell the aliens who we are, it's more for ourselves to
Smart.
figure out
Sm-
how to get people engaged. But yeah, any
Yeah.
new mission for NASA at least tries to find similar ways to do that. So keep an eye out whenever you see a new mission that is of interest to you.
Mhm.
Go to their website. There's probably some similar campaign.
To send a piece of us out there somehow. Yeah.
And
That's
just a quick
cool.
aside, you mentioned, connections. There's actually a pretty cool series of books that are called Connections. And
Mhm.
I know the author's come out and done some lectures over the years, but one of them that I found fascinating is the space shuttle booster rockets. And the size of them and the shape and everything can tie its connections all the way back to Roman days. And
Oh yeah, because the size, yeah, to the
you
shape,
heard that one?
size of the rails of
The
the train.
chariot
Yeah.
wheels made grooves in the
Mhm.
road, which made the size of standard railroad tracks, and that's how we had to make the boosters to fit on the railroad cars, and so it's all connected.
Yeah. What do you guys think about the message to space, Bethany? What do you think?
I love the idea of it. And I can imagine like sending parts of ourselves out to space, but there's just a little part of me that wonders about the intentions of anyone that would actually read it in space, a space alien. I'm just thinking about the colonists to the New World and how well they interacted with the people that were already there. And I kind of wonder sometimes about the interactions. And I've also lost my my Zoom, so I can't see you anymore. I'm looking for you here.
Oh dear.
We hear you and see you fine.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
If you need to go out and come back in, you can.
I think the original Star Trek movie, wasn't that Voyager came back? It was called V'ger or something like that.
Yeah,
and
V'ger.
It had become sentient, I think.
Yeah, because they found the message, and they're like, okay, we came because of this. We saw you, and
Yeah, I mean, those two missions are considered interstellar now. They believe that they've gone out beyond the influence of the sun, and New Horizons, which went to Pluto, is heading outbound as well. There's no atmosphere. There's nothing that can degrade other than just long term. These once the batteries are depleted, or if it's got plutonium, what we call an RTG, a radioisotope thermal generator. Once that gets depleted, it's basically dead, right? It's just a hunk of metal in space, but it could last literally billions of years, right? So I know I hate to say it, but I think they had some human ashes on one of those recent moon missions, which unfortunately failed. I think it had to loop back around and burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. Not that it matters, but it's I know they wanted to have the ashes on the moon, but it's kind of interesting to think about.
well, they sent Gene Roddenberry's ashes up to space, right? I'm not sure if it went to the moon.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
I don't remember which project. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
but yeah, I guess I'm in favor of doing it for public engagement reasons. I figure any alien that's advanced enough to even find it, because space is so vast, that if they do find it, it wouldn't matter anyway. We figure out where we are regardless. So.
Yeah, if they're advanced enough to find our message, they're advanced enough to find us, I think so.
I would think,
yeah.
See, I prefer to see that it would be like that movie Arrival. Clearly, that's where all my space knowledge comes from, movies and TV.
Movies and yeah, exactly. Well, it is though. I mean,
They
it's not a
would
joke,
come and help us, and which would help them in our 500 years or 2000, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Either that or they're so advanced that they don't even care about us, one or the other.
Right.
Where it's like first contact, the Vulcans come down and they're just like, okay, what are you guys doing?
Okay, what are you doing? What's going on here?
What's going on? We see some warp.
Right. I definitely don't like the signs one where they've come to harvest us. I don't like that.
I don't like those.
Luckily, I did not see that one, but I did love Arrival.
I haven't seen Arrival.
I always like the Stargate series, because to me it would be really cool to just be able to walk through a gate and end up somewhere else almost instantaneously.
That would be awesome.
The possibilities would be endless in that kind of scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I was reading something. I think it was time travel, or if we had portals to move us from one place to another, that all transportation would be gone. Like no airplanes, no ships, no nothing. Because we could just have our portal to take us from here to Venice or wherever.
Yeah, I think Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, he had a fascinating quote. Well, when you think about it, there's only two options, right? Either there is alien life or there isn't, one or the other. And he said either one of those scenarios is kind of equally terrifying to him when you think about it.
Yeah, good point.
I actually love Red Dwarf. It's one of my very favorite British comedies, space opera kind of thing. And their premise is there is no other life in space, but the Earth has gone out to space. So there's all sorts of weird things that kind of seem like aliens sometimes, but they're like, oh, it's alien. No, it's from Earth. It's a really interesting concept.
Well, I mean, think about it. If Europa actually has no life and we ultimately colonize out there, why wouldn't we bioengineer some kind of fish or something that could survive there so that we could actually, fish
Yeah.
and eat plankton or whatever, And I would imagine if there's no life there, as long as we're not interfering with anything, then we would want to do something like that.
But if we want to live there, we'll probably have to, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's see, where are we at? Who has a question? Andy, do you have questions for us?
I was just curious, have you had any other space guests in the past, or am I kind of the first?
You're the first space guy. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
First space guy.
First space guy.
Glad
I
I
was
can
thinking
say
that. I actually know somebody who works for NASA. She's a meteorologist. And I was like, oh my gosh, I should ask her. Like, why didn't I think of that? Because she's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in South Florida, so I used to always, for example, go to Disney World and Epcot Center when I was a kid. And the acronym Epcot actually stands for Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. And so I think I've always been fascinated with that. And they even had a ride. It's gone now. I think probably because of a sinkhole. I don't remember why, but they had this ride where you're going through like space colony and at the very end you kind of pick your ending that you wanted to see. So as a kid, I was always just fascinated with the real life implications of living in space and even like underwater cities, right? Instead of having a dog in your apartment, they had instead of a kid fixing his muscle car with his dog sitting next to him, it was a kid fixing his submarine with a sea lion sitting next to him and getting ready to go out into the water. So, those are the kind of things that fascinate me, that are just kind of variations on what we already know today, but kind of taking it into different, more extreme environments. So we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
All right. What about video games? Do you have a favorite themed space game, or do astronauts or robotic operators use video games to train? I feel like everybody uses video games to train.
I do have fond memories riding my bike to the mall to get asteroids for my, back when I had my Atari console. That was pretty cool. In fact, I still have a Sega Genesis console, which is kind of fun. I still like the retro
That's
sometimes.
pretty funny.
Yeah, I play games with my kids on Steam sometimes. I like some of the world building ones where you're like designing different cities and different colonies and stuff. I enjoy those kind of concepts. There's a lot of shoot 'em up games for better or worse, but yeah, and anything that has exploration, pretty fun. Space Invaders, of course, that's a classic. Now that song will be stuck in my head all day now.
Well, we're winding up the interview part of our show today. So I kind of want to just ask you, Andy, like, what would you say to people who are listening if they're curious about a career in space for them or for their kids? It's not you don't have to be a kid to get started in this, right? I mean,
absolutely. We have people from all backgrounds, not just advanced engineering degrees like aerospace or electrical engineering or computer science, physics, but we need people from all different backgrounds, a lot of like ex-military, Air Force, Space Force. We take people that are mathematicians. We take people that are, journeyman types that are, have their own toolkit and they can get in the clean room with a screwdriver and fix something. We need it all. So, anyone that's got interest in these areas, and there's a few big hubs around the country. Certainly in our area, we have quite a bit between Applied Physics Lab, Goddard Space Center, You go out to places like Colorado, around Denver, especially like up in Boulder, there's a lot. Of course, out in California, and as well as in Houston. So there's a lot of different places around the country too. You're not just limited to like Florida or something. And as I mentioned, it's a great career. You're never bored. There's always something. It's usually a dynamic environment. There's certainly plenty of opportunity for people that like to do self-study and just kind of sit in a cubicle and figure something out. But for me, I like being in that team environment, where we're just interacting with people trying to solve a problem, that's definitely my preference. And, it could be anything. It could be journalism. It could be someone that likes to just tell the stories. Could be people that want to build the ground systems or the antennas. All different backgrounds.
That's awesome. We don't think about that. Just like, people doing theater. It's like, oh, I'm not an actor. There's so much more that goes into it, right?
Exactly.
It's like, I'm not going to be an astronaut, but man, we need somebody to feed us food in our canteen.
Yeah,
like that.
and if anybody is young enough and wants to be an astronaut, get involved in, things like learn scuba diving, maybe get a pilot's license, get into robotics, model rocketry, those are all great things on a resume. So.
That's cool. Any burning questions you guys still have to ask? Now's the chance.
I'll just put in one plug for our local area since Jasmine and I are in Maryland. If anybody comes out to Washington, D.C., we have, of course, a lot of famous museums, Smithsonian especially related, which are usually free. But one of our samples from asteroid Bennu that we brought back from the OSIRIS-REx mission is now in the Natural History Museum there in the Gem and Mineralogy area. So go check that out. And then if you're at the Air and Space Museum, we have several exhibits of our missions there, like Messenger and New Horizons that you've heard about, and especially in the Hall of Planets there. So check that out as well.
Cool. Is there a way that you have that people can find you if they want to contact you, Andy?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure the best way to do it, but I can. Would you prefer to me put it in the chat or?
No, just tell us. Yeah. Well, I mean, you can do both, but.
Yeah, just email is probably the easiest. That way I can filter through it, and when I need to put them all in a folder and then answer them all at once. But yeah, it's just Andrew, ANDREW.Calloway, CALLOWAY, and then the @sign, and then JHUAPL for Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab, and then .edu.
That's awesome. Thanks, Andy. Yeah. This has been awesome. And I want you to stick around. I hope if you can, we're going to finish out the show.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if anyone knows literary agents or editors trying to get my books published, let me know.
Very cool. We like to do the cuddle of the episode before we go out. So I was thinking, like, what about cuddling in free fall? I'm sure the astronauts have tried this. I don't it's probably not part of their official research, but it should be though, because in space we're going to need connection still, right? We're going to need to be touching each other.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if you've seen pictures of how the astronauts sleep, but they have their sleeping bags that are actually vertical. They're like up against the wall and they're essentially strapped in, right? So they won't float away. And so I can imagine you'd need something like toe holds or something where you can put your feet,
so you can get,
in the toe hold. And otherwise, you're just kind of, going in all different directions. You don't want to hit your head on the wall.
Yeah, you wouldn't have leverage, like even hugging your coworker. How would you do that in free fall?
Exactly.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's
or
what
you
I
pat
would
them
suggest.
you pat them on the back and they fly across the room, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you definitely need, I think, some kind of toe holds.
Yeah, some kind of leverage. What would be the best? Yeah, what do you guys think would be the best cuddle position to try in space?
Good question.
I see windmill in the chat.
Windmill? I don't know that one. I'd probably go for just a plain old hug first, because then you could still like leverage behind you, both of you, and then you could lean in.
Maybe a koala, throw the legs in there too. to hold
Oh
the
yeah,
other
the
person in
legs.
place.
Hold on. Yeah.
Mhm.
Maybe one could be strapped to their sleeping and the other one would hold on to them. Do koala. Yeah.
Straps now. This is getting weird.
Yeah, I know.
See, in
it's
microgravity,
crazy.
you can come up with new ones that you can't do on Earth, where like one person's vertical and one's this way or something.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That'd be interesting.
You could do cuddle Tetris.
Cuddle Tetris.
That's the one where like sometimes like if we're in bed and I'm like just wrapped around their waist, like my like this is a body and then like my body is just kind of like wrapped all the way around this way. That would work way better in free fall, right?
Good point.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Anybody else have any ideas for our cuddle of the episode?
I gotta believe we're
Jordan?
gonna have space hotels not too far in the future, so
Not too far
there'll be
away,
a lot of
right?
interesting stories coming out of that in the years ahead.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, and I want to look up research on like I know about connection with the people like up in the space station because it's such a small group of people, how they get along and how they're connected back to the people on, at home.
Especially
So,
Mars missions, when we start going to Mars, when you're there, 9 months each direction. And yeah,
yeah,
maybe we'll even have spouses that travel together. I have no idea.
that would make sense, honestly, because we need the support, yeah. Well, let's see. Jasmine, what you got? Anything?
Got nothing.
We got nothing. Bethany?
Got nothing.
Yeah, a lot of the things I was curious about, we've covered. I do want to, is it time to talk about nurturednerds.com?
Just about. I was just making sure we didn't have anything else we wanted to talk about before that.
I'll just mention, just keep an eye out for the next 2 missions. Europa Clipper is launching in October. So that'll, be in the news and you can probably watch it on TV. That'll be for NASA TV. And yeah, that's a fun mission to follow. And then in 2028, we'll be launching the Dragonfly mission, going to Saturn's moon Titan. And because of its thick atmosphere and low gravity, if we could go there today, we could strap on wings and fly around ourselves. So this is basically a quadcopter, well, a dual propeller quadcopter that'll be flying around, exploring the surface, including these huge dunes that are as tall as the Statue of Liberty. So that'll be a cool mission. So keep an eye out for that. 2028.
I thought of one more question. Oh, Bethany, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say on NASA TV, do you get to see that with the people that are seeing it? I mean, is that public knowledge? Can we look at those dunes and the little helicopter?
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you've heard of Ingenuity. The Mars rover actually had a little mini helicopter called Ingenuity, and it flew around for several months. And they were always sending those pictures back to Earth. So yeah, definitely, if you're interested in that, you can see all the pictures that Ingenuity took of the rover and that the rover took of Ingenuity. We call it the Marsquito instead of mosquito. Unfortunately, it's not operating anymore, but that was fun. And yeah, usually NASA has like picture of the day and different news press releases and things when there's big discoveries and that kind of stuff.
Cool. Really awesome. Yeah, let's head toward the checkout here, but let's do the promos first. Bethany, will you tell us what's going on with Nurtured Nerds?
Well, I think I can't see all the things that's going on, but I do know that if you go to nurturednerds.com, you can learn more. Look us up on the website, find out more on Instagram or Facebook, or email us to become a member of the Nurtured Nerds because it's free, and you can be entered to win for a chance to win a fun prize. So that's all I've got because I can't see anything else.
You're fine. You're fine. You pretty much got all of it. We have a raffle every 3 months, and our new members get entered into the drawing to win, and you could win a free 30-minute session with a professional cuddler after your screening. You could win my ebook that I wrote called The Art of Authenticity, which talks about how to figure out what you want and how to say it to people. And we also have a gift card for video gaming and a couple of other things. So yeah, come join us and come to the nerd breaks. We do games and get together and talk about connection on just about every week. You can find out more about those on our Facebook page, Nurtured Nerds. And you can see all of our podcasts on our YouTube channel. All of our past podcasts, yeah. Cool. So that's kind of what's going on with the nerds. And now I just like to come back around and give people another chance to say how you're feeling about this interview and what we did today. What do you think? But I'll go first. So yeah, I'm Mary, and yeah, I always love doing these. It's so fun to get connection in ways I never would have before, which I always do with this group. And I love talking about connection and nerdy stuff, and science is one of my nerdy things, for sure. So I really appreciate Andy being here today, and I'm feeling pretty good. So yeah, Bethany, how are you feeling?
I'm good. I am excited because I am going to look up a lot of these things I've just learned about, different NASA missions and peanut butter whiskey. And there's something, I know I wrote it down. There's lots of things for me to look up and learn and find out. And I'm really excited to talk to people that I never really would have had a chance to talk to before. So thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, Andy, how are you doing? How are you feeling after this interview?
This has been great. I need to have one of those whiskeys we can raise a toast. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, this is great. It's nice and relaxing, very informal. Those are the kinds of projects I enjoy working on. Not too stressful.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. Yeah. Thanks for coming today. Jasmine, you want to close this out?
Yeah, I'm feeling very well. Got through most of the whiskey, not all of it. But so I feel good. And this was such an incredible conversation. I really feel like I learned a lot, not just for all mankind, which also, like Bethany said, I'm going to go watch after this. And I really want to watch The Martian too. So, but everything else, other things that you talked about, I really found the water barrier thing fascinating, and the plumes and gathering, trying to go right through it to gather the samples. Yeah.
A lot of these shows are based on books, and sometimes the book is better than, sometimes it's the other way. So I recommend trying both.
Yeah. And I always love coming back around because part of my identity is that I feel like I am educated. So like, what's the difference between science fiction and science, because most of my exposure is science fiction in media and movies and TV, right? But like, wait, what's the actual science? Oh my gosh, they really are doing water barriers, and they really are doing these missions to Europa, and it's like, what is
amazing
actually
how much science fiction turns into science fact eventually.
Yeah,
So
and like the
true.
line you were talking about, a line from, the surface up to
Base elevator, yeah.
the base
I
elevator.
know.
That's another thing from, what movie was that? There was that
That's I
Ad
can think
Astra
of
with Brad Pitt.
several iterations of that I've seen in
Oh,
different shows
really?
and cartoons. Yeah, that idea that there would be some structure that gets us above the atmosphere.
Mhm.
I know I've seen that in multiple things, but yeah, I didn't think it could ever be feasible in reality.
Yeah, we're right on the cusp. Even like fusion energy is getting closer and closer to
Oh,
reality.
wow.
That's
Wow.
exciting.
Yeah.
So exciting. Well, thank you guys all for being with us today. Are we feeling nurtured?
I'm feeling nurtured.
Yay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna invite us if you want a big hug.
Big
Thank you for
hugs.
being supportive. I appreciate it.
All right. Let me see. I just smashed my microphone, so you probably got a big. Anyway, thank you for being here. Okay, Nurture Nerds podcast closed. Woohoo! Bye.
Woo! Bye. Thank you.
Good to see
You guys.
you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Close the Close the thing. What is that thing they use on TVs? Yeah.
Ah.